Hi guys, we left off talking about photosynthesis and the importance of the sun. So here we have the sun, and we've got, starting with the most energetic, we actually have gamma rays and going all the way through to radio waves. But they're actually, regardless of their energy capability, they're all coming to us at the same speed of light. But what we're really concerned about is visible light. So we're really concerned about visible light and the fact that where green lies in that visible light spectrum. So if we think about light, the way that we see color is because all other things are being absorbed and that one color is being reflected back to us. So when we see green, it's because red, yellow, oranges are being absorbed, and my blues, indigo, violets are being absorbed. So all these things are being absorbed. And green is being reflected. Now if we look at where green lies, it lies right in the middle, which means that it's getting really all those low frequency waves of color, and it's also getting the high frequency waves of color. So it's actually an evolutionary advantage that we have green here. It also depends on the composition of the atmosphere. So the atmosphere is mostly nitrogen and oxygen, which are really pretty big elements. Before, we didn't have nearly as much oxygen in our atmosphere. It wasn't until we had photosynthetic organisms that actually produced oxygen that it changed. And early in life, on the history of the planet, we had a lot of things in the red-blue range because that light could travel better through that atmosphere, and so we had a lot of things called cyanobacteria. So there is a reason that plants are green. It's just not a random color. There are lots of other different types of called pigments. So the best one that we know is chlorophyll, and that's what gives plants their green color. But there's also things called carotenoids, and those are things like orange and yellows and browns, and those give plants their color in the fall. So in the fall, when we're facing away from the sun, we actually have lower frequency waves traveling because they have a longer way to travel. And so these other pigments, the carotenoids, get picked up, and that's why deciduous trees turn color to gain as much energy as they possibly can from the sun. So all these waves are coming down, and we know that they are tons of energy, right? So we have the waves as energy, and we also have these things called photons, and the photons are just particles of energy, and they're traveling with the wave, and the higher the frequency, the more photons you have, right? So we have all these photons of light, and they're coming down, and we know that energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only be transferred, and so it transfers and it hits the chloroplast. Okay, so there's my chloroplast, and then I've got my stacks of thylakoids inside my chloroplast, and inside those thylakoids I have this membrane, right? So if I looked at the membrane down here, just like a cell membrane, it's made of more than what it seems to. It's not just a blank space. So we don't have phospholipids in there, but we have lots of proteins. So it's a protein lipid. And our proteins kind of look like this. There's a couple sets of them. And so I've got these big molecules, and I've got some small molecules. And so when these photons come, they're gonna be transferring through here, and they're gonna hit these molecules randomly, right? And because energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only be transferred, these photons are going to transfer some of their energy. So here comes this photon, right? So make a big, it's bigger than I wanted. But there is a photon of light. And it's traveling, and it hits randomly in this thylakoid membrane. And what happens is the energy gets transferred here, and it excites the molecule here. So this molecule is actually chlorophyll A. So it's a chlorophyll A molecule, and because it's part of a living molecule, it's got mostly schnapps in it, right? So there's lots of things happening in there, but so a couple of things happen right here. So a photon of light hits that and excites these molecules inside here. So this is really, this molecules, and these are proteins, and this is really made up of schnapps, and which is made up of elements, right? And all these elements have electrons, and electrons are get really excited. So when the photon comes down, it's going to transfer a ton of energy to this chlorophyll A molecule. So much energy that lots of electrons get so excited that they'll bump out of this molecule and start traveling down. Whee! Down what's called the electron transport chain. It's called the electron, transport chain, or the ETC. So it transfers its energy, whee, and it goes from a high energy to a low energy. And then that energy is then transferred to another molecule, right? So here's another molecule, and it's transferring this energy that it's gaining from going from a high concentration to a low concentration, or a high energy state to a low energy state, and it's transferring all this energy to another molecule, but this time it's chlorophyll B. And that chlorophyll B molecule is also being hit by a photon of light. Oops, we lost our color. So it's getting hit by a photon of light too, because those photons are flying in, right? So now it's got energy coming down from the electron transport chain, and it's got energy from this photon light. So it's got a ton of energy, right? So yet more electrons transport out, and they go whee down the electron transport chain. And what that does is it drives a group of molecules. So a little bit of ATP is made in this process. But really what it does is, this is an enzyme, or a protein, that allows things to get pumped through it. It's call it a proton pump. So it's mostly pumping protons, but really, if you think about it, because hydrogen is the most common element in the universe, lots of hydrogen is in here, right? So when we hit this chlorophyll A molecule, or in chlorophyll B molecule, we've got a lot of energy coming out. Most of this energy gets so energized, and it gets attracted to the polarity of H2O. So now we've got some water in here, right? Because it's just schnapps. It's part of schnapps, right? So I've got this molecule of water here, right? So really, H2O is made up of hydrogen, which is one proton and one electron, and I've got oxygen, right? So this water hits it, or this photon hits it, splits the molecule. What gets released? The oxygen gets released, right? And hydrogen then donates an electron. So now hydrogen, because it only has a proton and an electron, it's donated its electron, and now it becomes H plus because it has more protons than electrons, right? So I have all this high concentration of H plus molecules flowing around inside and around my thylakoid membrane. And these protons, because really all that's left here is a proton, gets pushed through this enzyme, this protein pump, and it gets combined with a couple of different things. So the biggest one is a molecule called NADP plus. Oops, plus. And when it hits an H molecule, now I'm going to yield, which I don't think I can actually do a yield sign. I'll add it in there later. It will yield NADPH. So all it's doing is adding an H to it. And this NADPH is really cool stuff. It's high energy, and it has the capability of donating or breaking off that H again, which donates more energy, goes back to NADP, which then can become NADPH again through this process. So this whole thing, this is called the photosystems, and we'll talk about that here in a second. This whole thing is driven because photons of light are coming through. They're hitting the chlorophyll A and the chlorophyll B, which contains water molecules, because water is just part of schnapps and it's part of most molecules. It's hitting that water molecule. It's splitting the water molecule because there's so much energy involved in it. That it breaks H2O apart into O2, which we breathe, right? So that's where O2 comes from. And H pluses. And then those H pluses, so H pluses and E's, right? So this is hydrogen. And hydrogen just becomes high in concentration right here, right? And the electrons get bumped off and whee down the electron transfer chain. They excite chlorophyll B. That has photons hitting it too, so it's doubly excited. Whee! And it's donating all this energy. So all these electrons they're donating energy so that the enzyme can donate energy to enzyme to combine NADP plus and H plus, which is hydrogen, to yield NADPH. So that's my end product, is NADPH, which is just, it's energy.